Hi, I'm Selena from Annie's Bookstop of Worcester, and I'm here with P Behrens, who writes in many different genres, magical realism and horror, and he's writing a YA fantasy, is it,
Yeah,
book?
I'm finished up a YA fantasy. I'm doing rewrites and trying to sell it, and I'm working on a new urban fantasy.
In fantasy. Wow. Okay.
I'm all over the
Um,
place.
and he's written many short stories and he's working on novels and novellas. Um, so for readers unfamiliar with your work, how would you describe what it is that you write?
Uh, I try to write. I mean, honestly, I right now what's published is horror. I try to tend to lean more towards psychological type things, and a lot of what I write deals with the idea of perspective and the different perspectives of evil, good, what makes a person a good person, things like that, and a lot of psychological sort of issues as well. I tend to just kind of write what I'm interested in, and I deal with, and a lot of it has to deal with like psychology and the way people think and view things. But yeah, I try to just write interesting stories. Every one of my stories is a little bit different. My first book, Portrait of a Nuclear Family, was psychological horror, extreme psychological horror, and my novella that just recently came out, Missing in Miskatonic, is more of a noir detective story with horror Lovecraftian elements in it. And that's the first of a series that's going to kind of bounce around. So the second one that's turned in takes place in the Pacific Northeast and is going to deal with werewolves and Sasquatch. So the first one's Lovecraftian in Arkham and Miskatonic. The second one ends up in Washington State with werewolves and Sasquatch fighting it out. and and that takes place in the late 1920s, early 30s. So at that time it's going to deal a lot with lumber barons and Native Americans losing half of their reservations to the lumber barons and the lumber concerns, and how they're dealing with that, and how they're dealing with having their land taken from them, plus, all these lumber guys coming in and just denuding the land that they hold sacred. So there's a lot going on there, So, and then the YA is just your traditional kind of, it's very much, what's it called? Chronicles of Narnia sort of book. And, kids get thrown into this world, have to deal with it. And the idea for the series will be it'll jump in periods of time throughout the series. So much like Narnia did. The the magical realism that I'm working on right now is, or not, sorry, not the magical realism, but the urban fantasy that I'm working on right now is very much a worldwide, world hopping thriller in the vein of American Gods, but with like folk creatures instead of gods. But
Okay.
I get bored, and I get bored easily, so everything I do is very different. But the one kind of theme throughout the whole thing is the world and the way we view it is very much a matter of perspective.
Okay. Do you work on more than one book at a time?
No, I tried, but I suck at it. So not really. I might take a break in between drafts, or if I finish a chapter and somebody says, "Hey, could you write a short story for this thing?" and I happen to have a good idea for it, I'll take a break and do it. But generally, no. I might edit on the morning and write in the afternoon. That's the most of working on separate projects you'll ever get from me. But generally, no. I can't. I don't have the bandwidth for it.
So you have done quite a few short stories, and you've had books or you've had short stories in anthologies, right?
Yes.
And so is it harder to sell a short story than it is to sell a novel?
In my opinion, absolutely. I and part of this could be that maybe I'm not as strong a short story writer as other people are, but if you're not being asked or invited into an anthology, you're competing against hundreds of other stories. And a great example is there was an anthology that I wrote a piece for recently that was open call. I sent it in. I think I got to like one of the last rounds, but ultimately they were like we had four open spots and yours just didn't make it. And they were like and they were very like we loved this story a lot, but it just didn't fit with the rest of the anthology. And so now I have this very specific short story sitting on my hard drive that now I have to find a new home for that was written specifically for a themed anthology that I'm like, okay, now I have to figure out how to sell this thing. And again, I'm competing with hundreds of other people that also wrote short stories for that anthology that are also the same theme. So now like every other open market is going to get inundated with the same theme of story. And I'm not only competing, I was not only competing with the hundred of other people for those four spots, but now I'm going to be competing with all those hundreds of people for the very few paying spots along across the board that are, it's not even four spots, it's maybe one spot at a magazine or this or that. So it gets short story writing is tough because there are just a lot of people doing short stories and there are and the number, especially with the advent of AI and people churning out AI stories, a lot of magazines have been just closing the doors to open call or closing their doors altogether because they can't handle how much is coming in. And it's just getting harder and harder for short story writers to really break in versus you write a novel. There are a lot of indie publishers that are looking at novels. There's a lot of room for self-publishing through Amazon and Ingram Spark. And it just books and in terms of selling things, especially since I'm like working and I go to shows to sell my stuff, it's selling books is easier. Selling a novel is much easier than selling a collection of short fiction or an anthology that you happen to be in. Unless that anthology is something that people go, "Oh yeah," or there's a name in that anthology that people link to and go immediately like, "Oh, I want to buy that." So, unless you're in an anthology with a big name, like Stephen King or Richard Chizmar or, Rebecca Rowland or something, you're not that anthology is not selling very fast if you're in like a generic show or something like that.
So, a collection of your own short stories won't sell as well as a novel of yours.
I thought it would, but no, it was not
Really?
the case. I was very shocked by that revelation. I put out my own collection and because I was trying to have it out for AuthorCon down in Virginia last
Mhm.
year. I had it for that and I put it out specifically for that show. And I thought that that would sell as well as my first book, and it sells, but not nearly as well as a novel. And now that I have the novella out, the novella is absolutely outpacing the collection.
Mhm.
So yeah, it seems like I think a lot of people don't tend to want to sit there. There are people who love short fiction and love collections, but most people, when they sit down to read, they want to sit and read a much longer, involved story. And I think until you get a really diehard audience, single author collections just kind of languish a little bit on the side. But I also, that book will always be there. I'm not taking it down anytime soon. So as I build an audience, more people will hopefully pick up on that collection and buy it. It's just always
Interesting.
there. So yeah, if the money trickles in a couple dollars here and there, it's like I'm still selling it. People are still reading it, and that's what's important.
That's very interesting. I hadn't heard any other things about short stories. Wow.
Yeah.
Okay, so getting back to your newest novel and the detective or the mystery
Yeah,
novel.
it's more of like noir detective story, kind of like Raymond Chandler, but add Lovecraft for the first one. Add supernatural stuff into Raymond Chandler's writing, and that's essentially what I'm doing.
So, what was the inspiration for the series?
I wrote a short story that when I finished it, I realized it was much bigger. And at the time, I was just writing Lovecraftian stuff. I was messing around, just trying to play with things. And originally, the short story was like me, it was almost like a practice of me writing in first person because it was one thing I really struggled with. And I wrote the first short story and I finished it, looked at it, and went, this could be way bigger. So I kind of cut it apart, figured out what I wanted to do with it, where to expand it, and then kind of put it off to the side for a little bit. And then I don't know, I decided one day, I'm like, you know what, I want to go do that. And I rewrote it as a full novella. And when I finished it, I was looking at it going, this isn't half bad. This is actually kind of interesting. So I went and reread some Raymond Chandler, and I really wanted to write a noir story. I love noir detective stories. I like the curmudgeon of a main character. I liked, this guy who's just angry and just annoyed at everything in the world, but has this heart where he's like, I still want to protect people, but God, I really don't like them. And I just thought it was just I find that funny. So I wrote it, and then I was like, I got to throw Lovecraft in here and make it supernatural, so it's more interesting for me to write. Because noir detective stuff, Raymond Chandler and Dashiell Hammond had done it well. I don't need to try to compete with those two. So I said, let me kind of like play off of them and then throw some supernatural stuff in it. And then I really like the show Supernatural. And I really like the show Carnival, which takes place in, Dust Bowl era depression. And I thought, oh, let me add those elements in and kind of stuck it all together and went, this would be a really interesting series. And so I set it up. I set the first one up as, okay, this ends, but this has a place to go. And then I pitched it to Crystal Lake, and they really liked the first book, and they said, yeah, let's go. And I said, great. So we managed to get it out in time for this year for back in August for Necronomicon in Rhode Island, and that's where it launched. And it's been doing okay since, from what I can tell. Right now, this week, or yeah, like, and then we just recently had a sale for the ebook for 99 cents. So I'm sure that sale will recur when the new book comes out in July. Hopefully, maybe we'll see what happens. But yeah, so we're doing a series. We're trying to get a series going. So
Hmm. So, how much research did you have to do?
for the first one, not a ton. The first one was read a bunch of noir stories, watch a few noir movies. I watched Chinatown a bunch of times, and then read up on Lovecraft, which I'd read a lot of Lovecraft already, so I kind of knew what was going on. And so that one didn't take a lot. That one was like, let me just kind of like put together this story that creates some red herrings, that does this, that does that, and kind of play it out. And to be honest, the first book is very kind of on the rails. It's not there's not a ton of twists and turns in it, but it's still interesting and it's still kind of like starts shooting off in different directions. The second book took way more research because I placed it in a real town. And that I will probably never do again because the amount of research it takes to deal with real places is insane. And it also added in, I put in a real Native American tribe, First Nation tribe. I used their language, which required a ton of research and a lot of time and a lot of questions. And it was just like I did my best to do it well, but I will probably never do it again because it was just such a huge amount of investment in time. And now I feel really bad for whoever does the audiobook in the second book because they're going to have to say some of these phrases that are not easy to say. But I got recordings and I've got it broken down phonetically and I've got recordings for them to play off of. So I gave them the resources they need to do it right. It's still not going to be easy. So yeah, but I mean, but it was fun and I learned a lot. It was just a lot of research in the third book, I already kind of know what's going to happen in it. It's not going to take nearly as much research. So yeah, luckily I'm going to try to place most of the books in like in mostly fictional locations. So the first one was in Arkham, and Arkham, you can get that information, and honestly, it's changed over the years so much that it's not that hard. You can make a couple mistakes here and there, but I did base a lot of the directions and the locations off of commonly used maps that you can find
Mhm.
online of Arkham. So I used those maps versus trying to research this town of Tonisket in Washington in 1929 and trying to get exact locations, business names, things like that. I definitely took some liberties in that I changed who the sheriff of the town was. I changed certain things like that because it worked better for my narrative. But beyond that, the town is dead on. Like the description of the roads, where the businesses are, how you get from one location to the next, all of that is dead on. But the names and play and the names of people and things like that were certainly changed. I didn't keep real names because I don't want to get sued. So it's still a fictional story with werewolves and Sasquatch. Leave me alone.
Didn't get Sasquatch's permission, right?
No, no, couldn't find him. So hopefully, I live in Connecticut where there's a large Bigfoot contingency in my area. So hopefully, Sasquatch doesn't read the book and get angry at me. But I did discover, which was interesting, that it was a happy accident, but that the name Sasquatch actually derives from the Syilx language, which is the language I used from the Okanogan tribe. So when I picked the tribe and everything that I was going to use, when I was doing the research, I realized, oh, the word Sasquatch actually comes from their language. So
Wow.
that was like random, and I'm like, works for me. Like,
Oh,
booyah,
that's great.
makes my life easy. So I got to make a lot of connections that were like just legit. And I was like, that's awesome. I don't have to fake it. This is really there. So that was really nice. So there were some really cool little like oddball moments that I found, and I was like, oh, that fits in really easily and nicely. I didn't. Okay, cool. I don't have to fake it. That's legit. So
Did you ever get to go to the town as it is now?
I am broke. No,
Oh,
flying out to Washington is
spider, of
not
course
cheap.
you're broke.
Yeah, I flew out to Seattle years ago with my wife for her job interview for a job interview a while back, and that was expensive. Taking a trip out to northeast Washington State would have been even more expensive because there aren't really major flights out to that like general
Right.
area, and then you have to rent a car, and there's a lot going on. I would have loved to go out there. I would have loved to meet with the people I talked to in Canada about the language who helped me specifically with Silix. I just couldn't. Yeah, I can't afford all that mess. So I just did a lot of it on the internet and talked to. I got pictures. I talked to the historical society. They sent me
Ah,
just reams of scans of the town of the planning the planning mapping and the commercial mapping and everything. I got maps and pictures and newspaper articles and tons of stuff. And I just went through it all and went, okay, I'm gonna find what I need and change what I have to and just try to stick to it as best I can. But yeah, I wish. But honestly, most of this stuff that was existed in 1929, if you look at pictures now, they're gone. Because I
mhm.
did go look up pictures on Google Maps and stuff like that, and the places are all gone. They've all been torn down. It's completely new stuff. There's like a CVS there and some. I was like, it's not useful to me. So, yeah. So a lot of the stuff that was there in 1929 has been replaced or refurbished or what have you. So, yeah, to go in there now wouldn't have been a huge. It would have been actually. I would have had a better time going to Canada to talk to the Okanogan tribe that was helping with the language. But again, just money. It's a lot of money to fly up there and do that.
For somebody who's just getting into writing or and starting to do research, how would you recommend they go about doing it? I mean, what are some of the things that they need to do?
The best advice I got when I asked that question of another author was she said, start small, write your story, or at least draft it, get a rough draft out, get an outline out, write the story, then figure out the specific things you need to know. So if you need to know I need to know a street name because you're writing in a time where there are street names, get the street name. If you're writing in medieval time and you need to find out how people told the time at that point in time, not everybody was able to like look at the sun and say it's this. People went actually, somebody had told me like people told the time by the church. The church would look at the time on their sundial and then they would ring the bell. So you knew it was an hour, 15 minutes, 30 minutes based on the bell and the way they rang the bell. So that was how people basically knew what time it was throughout the day was the church bells. And you find those specific details and like this is for anything, even when writing, you don't want to throw so much information that it's overwhelming. So you pick telling details that help build the story, build the character. those are the things you want to research, in that you find the telling details of your story, and then you research that and pull it into your story. So it makes it a lot easier, because if you try to do shotgun blast research, you're going to fall down the rabbit hole of Wikipedia and never get out. Find the
Yeah.
specifics, look up those. So and generally you'll discover weird stuff. Like, I by looking up Sasquatch and where the name came from, I discovered that Sasquatch was a name that was derived from Silix and Okanogan tribe in that language. And I was like, "Oh, cool." And I ran with that. If I had looked up the word for Sasquatch in Okanogan, I would have never found it. But because I was looking for, let me just see what this is, I found some interesting stuff. I would have never thought to look up that other word. I found this, and I was like, oh, that works in really well with what I'm doing. I thought I was going to have to kind of, finagle it, but nope, it was there. And you just kind of find, like, I just said, hey, can you get me a map of this town in 1929, or as close to it as you can? And they said, great. And they sent me the map, and then I just looked at the map and went, oh, here's this. Oh, here's a movie theater that is right up the road. So this person's going to walk by it. And now I can have this person discuss how they miss going to the movies, and maybe they should go because it would get them out of their crazy life for a few minutes, and talk about how the movies were an important part of society during the Great Depression. It was the only relief people had during that time. So that was something I could add in. But, if you try to, and like I said, it was just like telling details and little things that I discovered while looking for one specific thing elsewhere. You're going to run across other facts, and those facts can be helpful. But if you try to shotgun blast your research, you're gonna end up getting a headache, and it's gonna become really overwhelming. So find details, look for the little nuggets that will help you, and you're gonna fall down the Wikipedia hole regardless, but now it's a more focused, tinier hole that you can kind of dig your way out of and crawl your way out of once you find that one little detail that goes, oh, that's what I'm looking for. That's awesome. That's really helpful. And then run away. Just don't bury yourself in research. The only exception to that is if you're writing historical fiction. If you're writing
Right.
historical fiction, shotgun blast away. I have a friend who I was asking about it actually, and he said he spends about a year and a half just researching before he writes the book. And I'm like, that makes sense, because you're
Yeah.
writing a book that's based in reality, and you're using what actually happened to create a story, and you need to know what you're doing. So when you're dealing with historical research and doing like something like that, yeah, go nuts. And you have to. But if you're just writing a story and you're just trying to get a little verisimilitude into your book, telling details, tiny bits, don't go crazy. You'll
Mm,
drive yourself insane.
good advice. Okay. So what was the biggest challenge that you had in writing and putting out? And what is the name of your book that you're talking
The,
about, your
the new
latest book?
one, Missing in Miskatonic,
Oh, yes.
Travis Daniels investigation.
Right. So what was the biggest challenge that you had?
For Miskatonic, honestly, I don't know. That one it was pretty easy, honestly. Like, I think the biggest challenge was writing in first person and not using the word I every single sentence. That was the biggest challenge, was learning how to write in first person, because I sucked at it. And that was the whole point of that story, was to figure it out. And luckily, at the same time, Jonathan Mayberry had come out with his Joe Ledger series, and that whole series, most of that series is first person. So I was like, great. And I loved that book. So I was like, I'm going to read all these. And I studied those a lot, because they're very similar in that except his is weird science and more modern military with oddball weird science and supernatural type stuff. So, this scientific plausible idea of zombies, scientifically plausible vampires, so on and so forth. Versus mine is just straight supernatural. But but yeah, but that whole thing was in first person. So I was like, oh, this is kind of similar to what I want to do. Let me read these. So I read them and studied them a lot, and then went, okay. And then I went and read a bunch of Raymond Chandler and Dashiell Hammett and went, all right, I got this. And I went in and did it. And that was just, it was a lot of studying and a lot of rewriting, trying to figure out how to do first person without just constantly writing, I did this and I thought that and I. So I had to figure that out. But that was probably the hardest part was just to make it readable because
Mhm.
I was just bad at first person. I knew it. So I was like, I got to figure that out. But putting the book together and just like, just sprinkling in bunch of Easter eggs for Lovecraft and a couple other there's a Stephen King Easter egg in there that a couple people have picked up on. There's little things all over and a lot of horror Easter eggs that I just kind of shoved in because I thought it'd be fun. Um, so that was just a lot of fun. And then the second book, the hardest part was the research and just making sure I did my due diligence to be respectful and accurate towards First Nation peoples and the town that I used and things like that. So, but it was still fun. It wasn't super hard. It wasn't a tough mindset to get into. Just writing in first person and keeping it interesting was difficult. That's probably the hardest thing because I'm just not it's not my strength and I'm trying to build that up.
Was this the first time you've ever written a novel in first person?
Yeah. This was the first time I've written a short story and a novel in first person. Yeah. I normally avoid it like the plague.
What do you normally write in?
Third, third
Third.
person limited. I don't do omniscient because I'm also very bad at that. and and honestly, that's really tough. I've had to do I've done some edits for some people and I've said like stay away from it. It's super hard to do and it's super hard to tell if you're being good or bad at it. You need someone to read it and then tell you no. And it's a really fine line between yes and no. So it's one of those things where I'm like, I hate rewriting so much that I don't want to risk it.
How do you
So like
decide?
I got to rewrite enough as it is. Thank you.
How do you decide what person to write the story in or a
It
story
depends
in?
on the story. Some stories work better third person with a little bit of distance, kind of like watching a movie. And especially noir, I think noir works the best as first because you're like in it. You're in the story and it's a lot closer and more personal and it almost feels a little bit more immediate. So that's I like I guess the griminess of noir first person. So
Mhm.
I generally play around with it. I think actually when I first wrote it, I wrote it as first person, and about halfway through, I was like, "Oh my God, I'm really bad at this." And I started writing it in third halfway through just to see. And I was like, I can do it better as third, but it doesn't have the same feel. So I just went, all right, now I'm going to go back to first and I'm just going to figure this out. And I just kept rewriting until I worked it out. And I mean, it took a few years, every couple of years coming back to it, playing around with it until I got it to a point where I was like, oh, okay, I get this now. Like I totally understand how to do this. But it took a lot of years of just goofing around with this short story that grew into a novella that I went, okay, I think I got it. And then Crystal Lake luckily agreed with me and went from there. So yeah, so now I'm like, okay, I've got first person down to the point where it's readable and interesting and fun. And that's my goal is just to be interesting and fun. And hopefully people like it, buy it, and keep getting the series.
Okay. Now, when you
Yeah.
write a book, are you a pantser or a an outliner?
A little bit in the middle. My first draft is generally my outline is really me writing up a synopsis.
Okay.
I just kind of jam like the major signposts of the story out in a synopsis format, which helps me later when people want a synopsis because I hate writing them. So if I do it as my outline, all I have to really do is ever update it later and clean it up a bit. And then I go from my synopsis to my rough draft, and my rough draft is a little bit bigger, and it's more of like I take the synopsis and I break it up into chapters and say this is chapter one, two, three, blah 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 blah. Figure out my chapters and then just go. And I use Scrivener, which makes my life a lot easier in that regard. And then I kind of run down it, and then that's my rough draft. And once my rough draft is done, I have a thing called a remarkable. Turn it into a PDF, throw it on the remarkable, and start making notes. Then go back and rewrite and then just kind of rinse and repeat with the PDF to Remarkable, make more notes, do it again, and just do it until I'm more or less happy with it. And then I start shooting it off to beta readers and say, hey, read this for me and tell me where I messed up and where it sucks and where I'm redundant and so on and so forth. The stuff I've basically gone blind to. And when they get back to me, I do it again. And generally by that point, I'm roughly done. And then I fix it up a little bit more, and then I start sending it out because eventually you got to send it out.
Hmm.
And then the publisher hopefully picks it up, and then they send me a bunch of rewrites and say, "Hey, fix all this." And I go, "Okay." I'm like, "Yeah,
Okay.
that's how it
So,
works."
yeah. Y My next question you pretty much answered, but I was just wondering what else can we expect from you in the near future?
Yeah, the sequel to Missing in Miskatonic, currently titled "Murder on the Monashi Mountains," is, I believe, like last I heard, was due July this summer of next summer, so 2025. Uh, the I have two books out on submission. One is magical realism, that's more literary, and I'm waiting to hear back on that. And then the other one is the YA fantasy that I'm still trying to find a publisher or agent for. I think it might be a little too long, so right now I have it with a friend, and we're trying to cut another, say, 10,000 words out of it to get it under 100,000. Um, but that might end up being self-published. We'll see. I'm still kind of playing around with it and figuring it out. And then I have the urban fantasy that I'm working on, and that honestly is becoming way more involved than I thought it was going to be.
Mm.
Again, using real world stuff, and I'm like, I hate my choices sometimes, and but I'm stuck with it because I'm like, it's the only way this thing works. So there's a lot of research involved, and I'm working my way through it, trying to get the rough draft done before I start doing any other major research because I got to figure out exactly like they said the small things I need rather than try to go crazy and do a ton of studying on Finland because I'm using trolls and that this and that and the other thing. And I have set pieces in China, in Russia, in Africa, and I'm like, what have I done to myself? So I'm like, I'm just like, I'm gonna get this thing done first, and then I'll work on the details later, and I'll get the basic story out first. So yeah, so that I don't know when that's gonna happen, but I'm working on it, and yeah, I'm always working on something new. I'm never not working on something. So definitely, Murder in Monashi Mountains this summer. Next summer should be the third book in Travis Daniels. Um, and then hopefully the magical realism and the YA fantasy are gonna get into the pipeline some point somewhere. But I'm trying to get it to a point where I'm putting out a book every 6 months ish. But I just need to find publishers and get that going. Once I have some deals in place, that'll be more like it'll be easier for me to like mark my calendar.
Okay, sounds
Yeah.
good. Okay, now I have questions about being a writer. What is your favorite part about being a writer on the whole writing and publishing process?
I think my favorite part is coming up with the stories and just creating. I like that. Uh, I like getting the book when it's published, but finding the publisher and everything, all that in between stuff is like that's the work. That's where I'm like, this is my 9 to 5 grinded out work where the book is written. I've kind of come up with the idea. I've written the rough draft. Now I got to rewrite. That's that's the work part of this. That's the part where I'm like, ugh, not a huge fan of this. And then submissions is the other part of it that's work that I would love to get away from. But those are the things you have to do. And I don't. I love going to the shows. I love selling my books and hand selling them to people. I love all that. I would love to get invited to more shows, over the year, but it's tough because I gotta try to aim for the summer because when school time hits, I got my kids and neither of them can drive, so I got to get them to their things. So when I have book shows during the school year, it complicates all of our lives. But yeah, no, but I love creating and I love hand selling the book. I like the beginning and the end. It's all the stuff in the middle that I'm like. I have to find the moments that I like and I have to work for it. But it's any job. It can't all be fun unless you're Jonathan Mayberry, who apparently loves every step of everything. I think he lies, but he says he does. I also think he's a cyborg. I don't think he's human the way that guy writes. But yeah, but I mean, but yeah, I don't mind it. I'm learning to deal and enjoy the rewriting process, but I'm still not my favorite. My favorite is again creation and the end, just the beginning and the end. All this stuff in the middle, I'm like, this is the job. If I want to have the stuff in the beginning, I need to do in the middle, and that way I get to the end, which finances the new beginning. So that stuff in the middle is just the necessary for me to get from beginning to end and have those moments that I really enjoy. So I'm
Okay.
kind of lucky in that I'm bookended by the stuff I like.
Uh-huh. Okay. So, what do you consider the most challenging part of the whole writing process?
Rejection, just the
Mm.
the the never ending train of rejection. Um, if you're looking for agents, you're going to get rejected a lot until you're not, and then when you're not, great. But then you're going to get rejected by publishers sometimes, potentially. Um, Short story writing, there's tons of rejections involved in that while you're starting out, especially when you're starting out. You're just getting rejected constantly. And fighting through that and learning from it is really difficult. I think one of the hardest things in that regard is also rewriting after a rejection because you thought the story was done, but it's gotten rejected 10 times and you're like, well, there's something wrong with it. There's some reason this isn't getting picked up. And you have to go back and look at that story and try to figure out like what is it about this story that people didn't like? Is it just that nobody's looking for this right now? There's like so many different things it could be that you're just kind of sitting there going, all right, I got to figure this out now. So that's rough. And try and having to come up with the answer on your own because there's no like editors are too busy to tell you why it was rejected most times. Your friends who are also writers might read it and be like, I really like it. And you're like, great, you're not an editor. You didn't pay for it. So you got, it's hard because you have to sometimes work out the answer for yourself that no one's going to give you. And it might take you might have to sit on a story for a year and a half and then come back to it 18 months later and look at it and go, oh, because now you've learned more over those 18 months that you look at that old story and go, I see what happened here. And then you got to go back and rewrite it. So I think that's one of the things is that it takes time. It takes a lot of time, a lot of patience, and a lot of determination. And it's entirely internal and up to you and when you're starting out to keep going.
Hmm.
And I think every successful writer has those stories. I'm currently reading uh, Full Throttle Full Throttle by Joe Hill. And in the beginning of it, there's a little intro. And in his intro, he talks about how he wrote like something like 5 novels before his first one got picked up. And he was like, and I wrote 5 bad novels. And I'm like, that's the kind of determination you need. You have to be willing to just suck it up, write the bad novels, get rejected, and then but just keep going until somebody says, "Oh yeah, no, great. That's awesome. We want that." And then
Yeah.
once you get your foot into that door, there's another hurdle, but that next hurdle is not as bad because now you have a couple people in your corner that will help you remember that, yo, you did do this. You were capable. We did like it. It sold. You're okay. Just be patient. It'll come. So it's like a determination thing.
Hmm.
So you have to be willing to just kind of suck it up, and that's really hard,
Hmm. And
especially for people who are working alone. We work by ourselves in a room with no one to tell us good job unless we finish it and sell it and do a good job. At which point we're now writing the new thing and suffering through it again and trying to figure it out.
and
So
from what I've heard, the more you write, the better you get.
yeah,
And
you got to do
so,
it every day. You got to keep at it. You can't really stop. And it's hard to keep at something when you don't know, especially if you're doing it as a job and you don't know if this is going to pay off. You don't know if this is going to sell. You don't know if people are going to respond to it. It gets hard. So you have to find reasons to go that are not monetary because writers don't make a ton
mhm,
despite what people think. You
yeah.
know, uh, most writers are barely making a living, and we still stick at it. But it's definitely something you have to fight for and work at.
Mhm. Okay. So, what has been your favorite adventure during your writing career?
Favorite adventure. I don't know. I guess going to shows. Going to my first show out of state. Like my first big show was AuthorCon in Virginia, right after Portrait of a Nuclear Family came out, and I was mildly shocked by how many people came up to me specifically to buy my book. They were like, "Your book is on my to get list." I was like, "That is crazy," and that was really neat. And then that year when that came out, I went to a couple other shows. I went to CT Horror, and I had people who were at CT Horror who were like, "I came specifically to get this book from you and signed." I was like, "You came to CT Horror Fest where there are movie stars, and you came specifically for me." Like that's nuts. Thank you. So that's been the coolest thing to happen anywhere is people saying I came to this show specifically to talk to you. I was like, okay. Like I don't know why, but that's awesome. So that's probably, but I haven't had any major like adventures. Unfortunately, I'm a very low key, boring guy. I tend to be really quiet. I go to shows, I sit at my table, I sell books, I go to my room, and I pass out. Like I am tired and I'm old. I have kids. When I go to shows, it's like I get to sleep. I'm gonna do that. So that's generally, the adventure is no. I'm good. Family vacations are where I do adventure.
Right.
Writing wise, I'm like I show up to a show, I do my job, and I go to bed because I'm tired.
So, what is the greatest lesson that you've learned thus far in your writing career?
Be patient. Be patient, and sometimes every day it's a grind. It was I Wesley Chu said it, and a couple other people said it. Wesley Chu, James Stutter, a couple other guys that I follow on Facebook and Threads and stuff like that. They all say they a lot, and it's a saying that sticks and it's smart. Is writing is a marathon, not a, is writing is not a race. It's a marathon. Uh, it takes time. And you have to be patient, and you have to kind of grind it out. And some days you're going to write 100 words, and some days you're going to write 3,000 words, and every day is going to be a little different. And you just kind of have to not get don't get down on the 100-word days. Really don't get down on the 0-word days. They happen and it sucks, but don't get down on them. Just go, you know what? Today sucked. Tomorrow will be better. Let me do better tomorrow. And you just kind of keep going and pushing forward. And it's a one day at a time sort of situation. And I think that some of the best advice I got was, be patient, deal with that. The other good piece of advice I got was about dialogue from Brian Stelfreeze, who's a comic book writer and artist. Was dialogue? He said he was told me my dialogue was beautiful. It was like a dance, which is all wrong. Dialogue is not a dance. Dialogue is a sword fight.
Hmm.
Sword fights can be beautiful, but everybody's trying to get something. So there are parries, there are dodges, there are all these things, but these two people want something. The dancers want togetherness. They want to be the same. They're after the same goal. Sword fighters are trying to win. And dialogue in a story is two people trying to win and achieve their point of view or achieve their goal, and they're trying to convince the other person that that their goal is better. So instead of a dance, be a sword fight. And I went, done. And I've stuck with that ever since. And my dialogue is one of the things in my stories that I personally think is some of my strength. My dialogue is one of my strengths because of that. And because I read comic books for years and it's all dialogue. So I learned how to write dialogue from basically comics. And I stuck with that, and I still to this day, Brian Stelfreeze, I owe him so much, just for that one bit of advice. I'm like, yeah, that was awesome. So every time I
Okay.
see him at a comic book convention, I make sure I thank him. He gets a little annoyed because he's like, "Oh my God, shut up!" It was so long ago. I'm like, I don't care, don't care.
Do you have any other pieces of advice that you'd like to share with other writers?
You know what? I wrote a blog post on my website, jpbehrensauthor.com, that has a list of seven. Seven guidelines. I was thinking it was guidelines to being a writer. And it was me. I was teaching a class about writing, and I had thought it was a good idea to go online and correlate all of the best writing advice, like the ten pieces of advice writers give to authors. And I correlated all of it. Like I found everyone I could find and have like a 20, 30 page document of all of these top 10 lists. And then I went through all the lists and I found the stuff that every single person agreed on. And I pulled all those and I found seven things that basically everybody agrees. And I took those and I said, these are the seven guidelines that are agreed by basically everyone of how to be a writer, how to be a writer, how to do this career. And that's on my website. I think it's pinned at the top so you can just click right to it. But it was read all the time, write all the time, rewriting, writing is rewriting, things like that. And it wasn't like avoid adverbs because not everybody agreed with that. So I said, okay, I'm not going to put that one in there because not everyone agrees. So this is stuff that literally every writer worth their salt agrees on, and not a single person could potentially disagree with it. So that's my advice. My advice would be read that list and go by it because that list of rules is it's not me, it's literally me standing on the shoulders of giants and just listening and reading and doing the research and reading what they had to say and saying and just taking the time to figure out like what are the commonalities, what are the common things that people said and agreed on, and these were the seven things that I found.
Okay, sounds good. Are there are there any groups, clubs, or organizations that you would recommend to other writers that may have helped you in your career?
Local organizations are generally the best. My local chapter of HWA has been incredibly helpful in terms of going to shows. The NEHW, New England Horror Writers, has been phenomenal in terms of getting opportunities to go to shows that I probably couldn't have afforded otherwise, unless I like shared a table with them, and that's been wonderful. AuthorCon is a great opportunity if you're a horror writer, specifically if you're an extreme horror writer. That's a great opportunity to go and meet people and network a bit. There's a lot of extreme horror writers that go to that, and it's a great cause. Um, but yeah, local stuff mostly. Local groups that are professional writers who are trying to get together and go to shows and help each other. New England Horror Writers is great because they also not only do they do shows, but every year they do an anthology. And if you're a member, you can submit to said anthology, and it's a paid anthology. So it's a paid anthology. You make a little bit of money, and you're also in a great organization. And this book comes out, and it sells at every show that they go to. They're selling these books at every single show. So your name is getting around a lot more. So I mean, local organizations like that are great. Uh, I haven't really had the best of luck with the national end of things.
Mm.
It's just too big, and I don't think I don't have a big enough name yet where a national organization's been wildly helpful to me. But through the national organization, I've been able to hook up with the more local stuff, and the local people are very helpful. Getting into local chapters of HWA or whatever like that has been helpful. More local contacts have been far more helpful.
Okay, sounds good. All right, now I have questions about you as a person. What is one thing that most people don't realize about you?
Um, Not much, honestly. I'm pretty much an open book. I think people don't realize that I don't think people realize how uncomfortable I am in most public situations. When I go to like shows, I try to be like this, bubbly, talkative, approachable. I can sustain that for maybe 4 days. At which point I shut down and I'm like, don't look at me, don't talk to me. I don't want to deal with anybody right now. I'm going to bed. And my wife will tell you, I'll come home and I will go to sleep for like a week. I just can't function with other people for a few days because my outgoing part of me just wants to die after about 4 days. I can't sustain it. I've tried. I've gotten it up to about 5 or 6, but I that's a stretch. That's really, really rough for me to pull off. But yeah, I think a lot of people don't understand how insanely uncomfortable I am in large groups and how really self-conscious I am in those situations because in my head I constantly am thinking all these people hate me. And yeah, constantly in my head. Like my head's messed up. I think everybody hates me and these people don't want to be around me and I'm just annoying everybody. But at the same time, I'm like, but I'm here to do a job and my job is to promote myself. So I have to do this. So I think some people think that like I don't understand how annoying I'm being at times. I get it. I totally understand. I'm just like, but this is the job and this is the writer personality. If I was being myself, I wouldn't talk to anybody. I would just sit in a corner and be like, please God, somebody talk to me because I'm lonely and no one likes me. So like I have to be really outgoing. It's the only way to get around it. So yeah, I'm sure people have that misconception because most of the people that I hang out with most of these people who see me at shows. They don't see me at home. At home, I'm just with my family. I'm in my room reading a book, trying to not be bothered. Or in my office writing, trying not to be bothered. But it shows, yeah, I'm constantly there, and it's nerve wracking as hell. So, because I'm like, I'm trying to be outgoing because if I don't, I'm afraid no one's going to come talk to me, and I'm just going to sit around and it's going to be a wasted time for me. So I have to be. So yeah, so that's definitely something I don't think anybody gets. I'm incredibly self conscious about that stuff.
Quite a few writers are like that, actually.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Excuse me. What is or are your passions when you're not writing, and how do you make time to do the things that you love?
My passions are like I love building Legos. I find that to be a very zen activity. I just sit very quietly. I can watch a TV show and just build a Lego and be like, this is awesome. And it's very calming for me. Um, I love video games, but I really don't have time for that as much anymore, just because of writing. Um, and I practice Kung Fu and Tai Chi. That's part of my exercise. I just do that. Uh, and my family. You know, most of the time it's like right now, it's like I'm mostly taking, if I'm not writing, spending time or doing something for the family. So like right now, if I'm not writing, like today I got to go and rake the leaves. And that's something I'll be doing for the family for the house. Cook dinner later on tonight. That's something I do for the family or whatever. Um, so if I'm not writing, I'm generally doing my second job, which is house husband, because my wife works. My wife's the one who makes the money. I stay at home. I deal with the kids. I deal with the house. I deal with my writing. So I've basically two full-time jobs, house husband and writing. So if I'm not writing, I'm house husbanding. So I'm cleaning, I'm raking leaves, I'm doing whatever needs to get done around the house so that my wife just has to come home and hang out with the family and doesn't really have to do that much. Sometimes she'll come home and cook dinner because I'll be writing and I'm at 5 o'clock, I'm working and I'm not moving because I'm getting something done. So she'll come home and be like, all right, JP's working. I'll just cook dinner real quick. I'm like, great. Because I've already put it out. It's usually out. We're good to go. Somebody just needs to throw it on the oven, on the stove, or throw it in the oven or something. But yeah, and the time, it's honestly, it's more of like a reward based system. Like if I finish this, then I can go do that. But if I didn't finish it, then I can't. The other thing I do is read a lot, but reading is in my opinion, is part of my job.
Yep.
So every morning I start the day out with reading a short story. And then I generally try to take care of some stuff in the house in the morning, get dressed, do any exercise I'm going to do, make lunch. And then once I'm done lunch, I come down to the office and I start writing. If I can finish up my writing, maybe I'll go play some video games for a little bit, or maybe I'll do something with the kids, or I'll do something for me. But otherwise, I go upstairs and pick up a book and start reading. And then I read until basically 10 o'clock at night. And then I'm like, all right, time to go sleep, and then rinse and repeat. So my face is buried in books, and I'm just constantly reading as research. When I'm not writing, I'm reading. You
Hmm.
know, those are the two job modes I have. And then everything else is if I can fit it in, do laundry, do that, mow, whatever, do whatever needs to get done, fix the thing in the house that's been broken for a week that I keep saying I'll get to. And I'm like, all right, I'm gonna go do this thing now. So yeah, so it's generally that. if I'm not writing, I'm generally fixing the house or doing something. So I don't have a ton of time for video games like I would like, or Legos or any of that stuff. Like fun stuff, I just don't have a huge amount of time for. Most of the
Okay.
time, I'm trying to just catch up on house stuff,
Mhm. Okay.
because my wife's working like crazy, and she works so much. It's like I don't want her coming home and dealing with that stuff. Like that's what I'm home for, is to take care of that.
Okay. So writers very often have furry or feathered or otherwise non-human companions to help them through their work. And do you have any, and what do you have, and how do they help or
No,
hinder you?
no. My son, my youngest has a cat. That cat does not help me in any way, shape, or form. I have to make sure that the basement door is closed so the cat does not come downstairs, because she will jump on the desk and be like, "Pet me, pet me." You get nothing done now. And I'm like, get out of my office. So yeah, I do not have pets. I'm not a huge pet person. I'm nice to the pet, and the cat freaking loves me. But I'm like, I didn't want the cat. That was my kid's request, was the cat. I didn't want the cat. um, and then now my kid wants a dog, and I'm like, I don't want a dog either, but my wife wants the dog, and I'm like, oh God. So there's discussion happening of like how we're gonna get a dog, and it's gonna be a small dog because I don't want a big dog. So it's just, there's a lot going on, and it's a lot of money. And I'm like, these things cost so much money. I'm not a pet person. I'm not anti-animal. I just don't want to deal with it. I got two kids. I don't need a pet. But my children want the pet, so my children got a cat, and now they want a dog, and I'm like, I don't. So that's still a discussion being hashed out at the moment.
Great. Just have two more questions for you.
Sure.
Um, where can people find your work aside from Annie's Bookstop of Worcester? And I have to do a plug for Annie's.
Of
You
course.
can you can get JP's work at Annie's, or some of it at Annie's, if you call us at 508-796-5613, or you can email us at orders at anniesbooksworcester.com. And where else can people find your work?
You can find my work on my website. It's jpbaronsauthor.com. There's a link, there's a spot in there for buy. You can just pick up my stuff there, and I mail it out. It's $5 shipping because I'm broke, and I'm not Amazon. I can't afford that mess. But it's $5 shipping for whatever you buy. So it's just a flat $5. Even if you buy one or three books, flat $5. Um, and I'll sign them all. I'll personalize them. I don't flat sign. I have a thing about it. I just don't do it. I think signing a book should be a special thing. When you have a bunch of flat signed books, it's kind of like, how do you know you met that person? It's just flat signed. A lot of people say, "Oh, but it drops the value." I'm like, the value will go up when I die. Don't worry about it. You'll be fine. Um, but the and then you can get it on Amazon, and you can special order anything through Barnes and Noble. They'll do it. I'm trying to get Miskatonic into Barnes and Noble because it should be available, but for some reason they're being weird about it. But yeah, my website, Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Annie's. My stuff is wherever. And then on my website there is a calendar, a Google Calendar, that if you flick through it, it'll show you what shows I'm planned or I'm scheduled for however far into the future. Right now, I don't have a ton because I've done them all. It was most this past season. I've got one coming up in March. Yeah, the end of March, which is AuthorCon. And then occasionally some local stuff pops up. But when that happens, I immediately load it up on the Google Classroom so you can see it there, and I'll mention it on Facebook and things like that. So,
Okay. And how can we follow your work and share your awesomeness?
I'm on Facebook, Threads, Blue Sky, Goodreads, my website. I think that's everything. Yeah, that's pretty much everything. I'm kind of on the main things on social media, but I'm not super there. Most of my social media is me posting about the books I read. It's like I'll post it on Goodreads, and then I'll just share it to all my stuff. And then if I'm on there, if I see something, I'll mention it. But for the most part, if I'm at a show or whatever, I'm on there. I do on Facebook have a fan group that you can join, and a lot of my announcements get made there first. Also, if I'm having giveaways or whatever, like right now, I'm working on getting the my short story collection is being recorded as an audiobook. Once that's done, I'm sure I'm going to give out a couple free audiobook codes, and first those will always go out to my fan club people first. So that'll get posted there first, and then whatever I have left will get kind of shared out from there.
And what is the name of your fan club?
I think it's called the JP Behrens group.
Okay.
Yeah, the JP Behrens fan club or something like that. Yeah, official. Oh, the official JP Behrens fan club. I think that's it.
Okay.
I didn't make it. Someone else made it, and then and then they made me an admin, and I kind of am just there.
All right. Well,
Yeah,
thank you so much. You've had some great input here.
thanks.
Um,
I try.
so yeah, thanks for joining me here, JP
Thanks.
Behrens.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.